Hello everyone and welcome back to ThursDev. I'm your host Luke, and today I wanted to talk about first impressions. Not in the personal sense, of course, but that of your game. As our industry has grown over the past decade or so, the market for games of every genre has become more and more saturated, and prices have been on something of a relative decline, so consumers have more access now than ever to alternatives to your own offering. Whether it be your game opening flow, cutscenes, or the way that you handle your tutorial, there are many points of failure that you can encounter that have the potential to drive an impatient player away, and you want to, as a developer, maximize your chance to grab the attention of your players and keep it. As Oscar Wilde may or may not have said, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And though never is a strong word, that old adage certainly holds true enough for video games. Like a TV show, if your players aren't captivated within the first couple of minutes, it's as like as not that they're going to leave and not even give you the chance to prove yourself. Which is one reason why it boggles the mind that there are still so many games out there that don't put much effort into this. Even games that I personally love often are considered arcane and needlessly niche because getting into them can be a pain. Unless your entire end goal is for players to pay for your game in the event that it's a premium title, you're very likely going to want to keep your players engaged and hope that they'll play through, hopefully all the way to the end. If you're one of the more and more frequent titles that now offer monetization options, this retention metric is even more important, as your players are only likely to purchase something from mid-game if they make it there first. So how do we retain players? What are the main items that drive them away, and how can we avoid them? You want to focus on what's called in the games industry, the FTUE. Now that may sound like an onomatopoeia for an old-timey cartoon cowboy spitting into a spittoon, but FTUE is an initialism, FTUE, or First Time User Experience. FTUE is arguably one of the most important things that you should focus on when polishing your game because no amount of well-refined game mechanics or beautiful, compelling narrative will matter if your players don't stick around to experience them. What FTUE amounts up to, ultimately, is the collective sum of all of the things that a player encounters within the first few minutes of launching the game for the very first time. From the moment that the game takes over their screen, to the moment, hopefully, you release the reins and let them run free within your game world. The scale of the FTUE, as one might expect, is largely dependent on the game itself. One size certainly does not fit all, and the necessary components of the FTUE will also vary depending on genre and the general complexity of the game, but let's look at what you typically experience as part of a FTUE and break down their importance and how to best make use of them. Before anything else in your game, before the player even encounters the first menu, we have the splash, or splash screen, often also referred to as the loading screen. Generally speaking, the loading screen is an unfortunate fact of life since most games aren't so lean that the device that they run on will be able to load them right into the main menu immediately, but there's still a pain point for the user. Excessive logos and long time spent looking at static images can lead to players starting to reevaluate whether they want to put in the time to even start your game. This mostly boils down to programming hurdles, but some games manage to hide their first time loading behind animated logos and intros. Anything that can be done to engage the player's interest while they inevitably have to wait for the game to start is going to be useful. In the event that your loading runs beyond the time the animated splash takes to finish, some compelling key art and a well-implemented progress bar can go a long way. I'm not even joking about this. Players want feedback. They want to know things are happening under the hood. This is why SimCity's old loading screens were ingenious in my mind. If you're old enough to remember them, the phrase reticulating splines may still echo in your head from time to time. While loading, the game gave you things to read, even if they were nonsensical to the layman, because they knew that it would take a while on computers of the day to load. Static screens with no feedback are poison to retention. Have you ever started a game and waited 30 seconds or so on an unmoving screen and started to wonder if the game had crashed? This is why. Any crash will kill retention, and even the implication of a crash is enough to drive some away. Some platforms even have a technical requirement that you can't leave a player watching a loading screen for more than 30 seconds without anything happening. So consider some movement on your loading screen. Any movement will help to reassure that your game hasn't locked up, and even better, some sort of feedback to show the player how close they are to finishing. After we finish loading in, typically we see our main menu. Many modern mobile games skip the main menu and opt to jump straight into the tutorial phase, but let's talk about main menus for a moment. There are players that love to tool about in the main menu, tweaking options and looking through extras, and there are many who just want to immediately jump into the action. There's a strong balance that needs to be struck between form and function here, and it's worth considering the demographic of the game when designing a game's menu. Is your game fast-paced and action-heavy? Is it flashy? Or is your game cerebral? Consider the tone of your game when developing its main menu, because even though it would take a very large leap of the mind to call it gameplay, the menu is still the first thing that your player really interacts with. The experience should be smooth, visually appealing, and appropriate to the game. I'm a fan of menus with a little extra animation to keep them interesting, and great music is a must. If you want to communicate to your players that your game is fast-paced, it should be quick and easy to get through the menu. Though honestly, it should probably be quick and easy to get through the menu regardless of what your game is about. After the player hits the play button, we arrive at the intro. There are many schools of thought on game intros, and some modern games don't even bother with them, opting to go right into the next phase and wind the intro into the tutorial. But whatever you decide, only one quick point that I'd like to implore my fellow game designers consider. Allow your intro to be skipped if it's not interactive. Honestly, allow anything that takes more than a few seconds to be skipped somehow. Any player starting your game more than once is going to get sick of seeing your beautifully rendered opening sequence eventually. Let your player play your game. Following the intro, the next phase is one of the most important in my mind in retaining your players. In many modern games, this phase is even hooked up at every individual step to broadcast analytics and watch where the players start to fall off, as a major point to continue to tune post-release. I'm talking, of course, about the tutorial. The word tutorial carries a fair amount of baggage, sadly, but what the tutorial really ultimately is the time spent in-game showing the player how to play. This can be accomplished through text and guided bits of gameplay, or through a well-crafted level, but regardless of what you do with your tutorial, your player should be confident by the end of it that they know how to play the game. Further things can be tutorialized in-game, but the basics should be in the player's repertoire by the time the FTUE is complete. If your player's in the game and you've left them on their own, and they have no idea what to do next, you've made a mistake. You can very well drop them in an unfamiliar situation and force them to start solving puzzles or experiment to succeed, but if you haven't even imparted upon them the knowledge of how to use their tools, a large portion of your user base is very liable to get frustrated and quit. Discovery is good, you don't have to hold their hand, but you can at least point them in the right direction. Something to consider with tutorial, which I might bring to your attention, is that more often than not, brevity and simplicity are the most successful methods of showing a player how to do something. Show, don't tell, if you will. Aaron Hansen, before he was Grump, one of the game grumps, went by Egoraptor and had a series of videos called Sequelitis, in which he did a fantastic video about the first level of Mega Man X as a tutorial, called Mega Man Classic vs. Mega Man X. It's worth watching, though with 12 million views already, chances are that if you're interested enough in FTUE to have found and started watching this video, you may already have seen it as well. Some games are far too complicated to tutorialize exclusively through gameplay, of course, but only the invested player is going to stop and read a paragraph about what to do in your game. Ideally, you'll introduce a concept and then let the player get used to that concept, and in an ideal world, reward them for becoming familiar with it. Aha moments are fantastic for players and help to build interest. If you can direct the player through gameplay itself, that is ideal. If you must use text, be brief, break it up into chunks, and let your player play instead of reading your in-game manual. A great first-time user experience can be the deciding factor between gaining a long-time player and early game churn. And once the entire FTUE is finished and your players are into the game, they should feel completely comfortable in the world that you've created for them. A clever mix of correct theming, Proper tutorialization and minimization of roadblocks and getting to that point will hopefully help your game to thrive and to get players into the most important parts, where you really want them. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope that you enjoyed this episode of ThursDev. If you're interested in more content like this, consider joining our little community of game enthusiasts who both enjoy the playing and the making of video games. Subscribing will help YouTube to deliver new episodes right to your inbox, if YouTube feels like it, and you can also find us on social media and at levelzeronpcs.com, our home away from YouTube, where eventually there will be some cool extra content that you'll dig. Regardless, thank you very much for sticking with me. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, and I also hope to see you back here again soon. Take care.